And my talk today is going to be on a biased history of our galaxy. And really, this is a story of the how we can build up a timeline of an individual galaxy, that is our galaxy, the Milky Way. In particular, in the era of Gaia, so Gaia plus other complementary data sets. And I suppose the title is kind of maybe a little bit cheeky. From one reason we can think about a biased history is that our perspective on the galaxy is always going to be biased by our location within the galaxy, biased by the populations of stars that we see, biased by the dust distribution, and also biased somewhat in the time that we're looking at the galaxy, because I'm going to be talking about the sort of past events in the galaxy. But also, yeah, and I hope you'll forgive me for this, it's going to be a biased view because mostly I'm going to be talking about work that I've been involved with. So yeah, hopefully that's okay with you. I think it's still representative, but yeah, you might take umbrage with some of the stuff. Okay, good. Right, so one of the real successes in astronomy over the maybe last 50 or so years has been the success of the standard cosmological model. This is being somewhat questioned and tested or altered really in the last couple of years with results from the DESI survey. But really, Lambda CDM has given us a real excellent idea of how structures grow and evolve in the universe. We have quantum fluctuations that then grow into dark matter overdensities, and those overdensities form and grow hierarchically, smaller ones falling into ever bigger dark matter halos. We then want to understand how galaxies form within this picture. And essentially, yeah, we have baryons, they fall into these overdensities, they cool, they form stars, and this is how we get galaxies. But I'm sure many of you are aware that the galaxy formation is far more complicated than this. And in particular, it's complicated because of the wide range of baryonic processes that we must encompass and tackle when we're thinking about galaxy formation. So the standard procedure, I suppose, now is to run cosmological simulations like the one I'm showing here, the Auriga simulation suite. And this includes all of the processes that we can sort of afford to run computationally. But, you know, sadly, because of this wide range of scales, we have to go sort of from the very cosmic surroundings of galaxies right down to individual stars, supernova, black holes. We inevitably we're somewhat limited in the kind of modeling that can be done there. And, you know, one has to rely on sort of prescriptions for very small scale phenomena and how they feed back to the larger scales. But despite this, the cosmological simulations do a really excellent job now of producing galaxies that look like the kind of things we see in the nearby universe. So these are snapshots of the final time from the Auriga suite. This is good, but you know, in detail, we're now trying to think about how the statistics of these galaxies, how they match what we see in the universe. And our understanding here, I suppose, is really being tested by results from JWST, which is testing our understanding of you know, how very massive galaxies form early on, how massive black holes form early, how regular disk galaxies form very early on in the universe. So I come at this from a kind of different perspective, and my perspective is trying to understand a single galaxy composed of individual stars. And I think this is best exemplified by this nice image from the second Gaia data release. This is the Gaia's view of the entire sky. And the way this image has been put together kind of demonstrates the power of Gaia, or the power of looking at the Milky Way. This isn't just a kind of composite photograph. This is an image generated from points of stars that Gaia has seen, and then you get a point for all whatever 1 to 2 billion stars that Gaia has seen, and that makes up the entire image we see here. So very much we're seeing a galaxy, the Milky Way, formed, composed of individual stars. And for each of these stars, we get a rich array of information. We get 5-dimensional coordinates from Gaia. We get 3-dimensional positions, velocity components. And when we complement this information with line of sight velocities from spectroscopic surveys, for instance, apogee, I'm going to show results related to, we get the 6-dimensional position velocity coordinates that give us the orbits of the stars in the galaxy. We then get the multi-dimensional chemical abundance space, so we can go up to sort of maybe 30 dimensions. And all of this we can observe many, many times. And that then gives us access to things like variability of the stars, binarity, a rich array of information. But then how do we get access to the history? This is really the subject of the talk. How are we going to use that rich array of information to learn something about how the Milky Way is formed and evolved? Well, here I'll just go into a few details about the kind of methodology on finding stellar ages, which give us this direct link to the history of the galaxy. And there are three methods I'm going to talk about that then relate to some of the results later in the talk. The first is a fairly standard method that probably most of you are aware of. When we look at simple stellar populations like globular clusters, the way you date those is by primarily looking at the location of the turnoff, the subgiant, yeah, you can see my mouse, this kind of region where the stars turn off the main sequence and have ascended the giant branch. And this is a very sensitive age indicator. For individual stars, when we have distance information from Gaia, we can also place the individual stars in this kind of luminosity diagram, and for individual stars get their ages. And that's what's been done, for instance, in this Zhang and Rick's work, where you've got metallicity versus age diagrams, and you can see there's rich structure, which I'm going to talk a bit about later. As we move up the giant branch, the separation between different age populations in luminosity becomes much harder to do. So the typical way that's been built up over the last 10 years for tackling this problem is by using carbon and nitrogen information. So if you have spectra, like from apogee, you can get carbon and nitrogen measurements. And the surface abundances of carbon and nitrogen are highly mass dependent. And mass dependence then gives you age sensitivity if you're on the giant branch. So this has been done here. This is work from Joe Chuka, where again, we've got an age metallicity diagram. And you can see it has some of the similar features to the diagram that's no longer there. But essentially, it's another way to probe the age structure of the Milky Way. And the final method I'm going to talk about is ages for Mira variable stars. So Mira variables are these asymptotic giant branch stars. They're right at the tip of the giant branch, right, going through these like crazy pulsations before going sort of planetary nebula, forming white dwarfs. But empirically, it seems that there's correlations between the pulsation period of the Mira variable and their ages. This then gives us a very interesting way to probe environments that are where we need to really see the very bright stars like those at the top of the giant branch in order to get any kind of resolution. So I'm going to show, for instance, results from the very inner galaxy where we can only really see this population of stars. Okay. And all of these things, I suppose the overall goal is to try and mutually calibrate these methods against each other. They're all model dependent, and that's really the problem with stellar ages. But fundamentally, there's a hope that we can mutually calibrate these different methods, in particular by looking at commonality between the kinematics and dynamics of different populations. Okay, and when we have this information, what can we do? Well, I'm going to talk for the rest of the talk about different episodes in this galactic timeline, and really thinking about how what the series of events were in order to produce the galaxy that we see today. So this kind of cartoon all the way on the right. And here I've very simplistically just divided it up into several episodes. So a kind of early Milky Way, which I'm not really going to talk about. And then I'm going to firstly talk about this period where we've got early merger events in the galaxy, most notably this GSE merger. Then the bar formation episode, it's going to be the second part of the talk. And then the third part, I'm going to talk about just general kind of what I've described as quieter time secular disk evolution, inside out growth of the disk. So that's how I'm going to organize the talk. sort of these 3 chapters of the talk. Okay, so the first chapter is going to be on this GSE merger and the splash population. So one of the real discoveries with the second Gaia data release has been this evidence for the last significant merger in the Milky Way. And this has been dubbed the Gaia-Sausage-Enceladus, or GSE merger. And this was discovered in the kinematic data from the second Gaia data release. Here, these are diagrams of azimuthal velocity, so like velocity sort of round and round in the galaxy, and against radial velocity, so the in and out velocity. And there are 2 metallicity bins shown. They're both metal poor bins, but these are the more metal-rich, metal-poor stars, as it were, and these are the metal-poor stars. Okay, and you can see that this region here, there's there's this elongated structure in velocity space, and this was dubbed by Vasily Belukharov as the sausage, hence the Gaia-Sausage-Enceladus name. But it's believed that this is due to a merging galaxy on very, very radial orbit, like shedding the stars off it tidally, and then these are the resulting orbits that the debris live on. And you then don't see at the more metal poor end a similar structure. So this is indicative of, well, it tells you something, I suppose, about the mass of the merging event. And another line of evidence that this is sort of a genuine, distinct event was from identifying globular cluster populations associated with it. So several people have done this. I suppose one of the early works was Guchul Myong's work, and this is a result from Tom Callingham, where if you use energy and angular momentum as descriptors of the orbits of the stars in the galaxy, you can then say, well, can I find globular clusters on very similar orbits? And you then do some grouping of the globular clusters, and one of the groups that Callingham found was associated with this GSE merger, these purple ones. So this is, interesting evidence that such an event occurred. But how do we then, thinking about this timeline idea, how do we work out exactly when the event occurred? So the idea for doing this is to, well, maybe I'll just explain this plot first. So this now is very similar. This is the rotational velocity of stars against their metallicity, and for sort of nearby stars, sort of nearish the sun in the Milky Way, and you can see the stars here rotating at like 200 or so kilometers a second. These are ordinary disk stars. When we go down to lower metallicities, we see the more halo-ish populations, these non-rotating populations, potentially some of them associated with this GSE merger. But then we get this slightly odd, peculiar population of stars that are more metal-rich, but also non-rotating. And these stars have been interpreted as being splashed by the merger event, so essentially thrown out of the disk during the merger. And then if we look at the youngest stars that are part of this splashed population, this will then give us a time at which the merger event potentially occurred. So for these stars, using this first method that I described earlier on, we have ages. So it's using the subgiant stars, the main sequence turn-off type stars. And we can then, somewhat crudely, but it seems to point towards the fact that the splash population has stars that are no younger than about 10 billion years old. So this gives quite good evidence that this merger was pretty early on, or fairly early on in the history of the galaxy. And this sort of picture is corroborated by the kind of cosmological simulation I showed, in the very first slides, where from one of the Auriga galaxies, you see a similar picture where you get this in situ population, the disk population, that's splashed up by the accreted event, and you get this sort of kind of step in the age distribution of these non-rotating stars. A further line of evidence for or the GSE is that if you look at Ara Lyrae stars, so just a good distance tracer, you get very, very accurate distances to Ara Lyrae, so you can map out the three-dimensional structure of the GSE debris. And if you look here, this is in a top-down projection, so sort of looking bird's eye view onto the disk on the left-hand side, and this looking side on. You see it has a very characteristic, almost like triaxial shape. So it's misaligned here in the top-down view in the XY plane. But also you can see here it's tilted out of the disk plane. So this is interesting, but it does then bring into question like this age of the merger. If we believe all of this is debris that was accreted 10 billion years ago, how then has it managed to maintain this configuration to the present day? How has it not like phase mixed or even become more aligned with the disk or this kind of thing? So recently, a paper that was only put on the archive a month or so ago, Adam Dillamore, a postdoc in UCL, proposed this model where to get a long-lived GSE merger remnant, which is the distribution shown in blue here, one way is to have a dark matter halo in the Milky Way that is also misaligned. So in this plot, maybe I'll just explain it a bit more slowly. So this is like a three-dimensional view of the Milky Way, so from the outside. This red ring is showing the disk plane. The red dot is where the sun is. The blue is roughly this like Ara Lyrae distribution, just the kind of equi-density contour. And if you and Adam tried to construct equilibrium models, so very long-lived models that follow the orbits of stars in the GSE, and required that they align with this blue distribution. And the way to do this was to put the dark matter at an even more tilted angle. And that's because when you combine the dark matter potential with the disk potential, then roughly the sort of major axis of that potential aligns with the blue distribution. So this is a kind of neat way to solve this problem. But yeah, it does make fairly strong statements about what the dark matter must look like around the Milky Way. But the nice thing is, in this model, it also produces a very reasonable local velocity distribution. So if you remember back at the slide I showed you, the kind of discovery space from the merger event, this is the azimuthal velocity versus radial velocity. The debris in this model has this very distinctive sausage shape. Another interesting piece of evidence for the GSE has been these chevrons. So here is a diagram now of the GSE material where we're showing the radial velocity. So again, the sort of in and out velocity from the galactic center versus the radial distance. And I'm not sure you can see particularly well, but can you see these sort of these two overdensities here and here? Yeah. Okay, good. These were attributed in a paper from 2023 by Vasily Blukrov as being due to apocenter pileup from the GSE merger. This seems, pretty plausible, and you can see there's a simulation here that nicely demonstrates this, that you get these lines essentially of like constant energy in the potential, and that leads, and those align quite nicely with the chevrons. But a couple of things that probably worth noting, One is that the chevrons here just appear on one side, right? And I mean, you can maybe say there's this one, but you definitely can't see, you don't get the nice degree of symmetry that you see in the simulations. But the other thing is they're very, very like delicate features here that we're seeing. Very like delicate, thin features. So again, if we believe 10 billion, the merger happened 10 billion years ago, how like the Milky Way is being kind of quiet, but maybe not that quiet. So to keep these very, very thin features. So it's a bit of a conundrum, and it's led, I suppose, some people more generally to really question, did the GSE merger happen much more recently? Okay, but we kind of hold that thought because we're going to come back to it, because now we're going to pivot to the second part, where I'm going to talk about the bar formation and its subsequent impact. And the lesson we kind of learned from the first part, this first chapter, is that if we want to work out how old, when a particular event in the galaxy occurred, we're not necessarily just interested in the age distribution of the stars that make up that component, because star formation can just continue in the component after it's formed. We're interested more in these extremal ages. So remember, we looked at the splash population. We found the youngest splash stars. Well, so now we're going to think about a similar thing, but looking at the oldest stars that make up another component of the galaxy. And that's these nuclear structures. So many galaxies that have bars also exhibit very clear nuclear structures. So here, NGC 1300, you see this this sort of overdense disk or kind of knot at the center of the bar of the galaxy. And you can see how these dust lanes kind of plunge in and almost connect onto the this central region. So when we look at some of these types of galaxies with JWST, you see, yeah, the nuclear structures are very, very prevalent. So NGC 1300 is this one here. You can see the bar and the kind of dust lanes still, but yeah, this nuclear region appears very, very clearly, and it's even got this sort of ring morphology, right? And many of the others have other barred galaxies also show this type of nuclear structure. So it's understood somewhat from stellar population modeling for these systems, but also from simulations, that these nuclear structures potentially formed when the bar formed. And that's because as soon as a bar forms, you have a way to channel gas right down to the center of the galaxy. And that gas can then settle into a disk, one of these nuclear disks, and begin forming stars. So now this gives us a way to work out when a bar forms in a galaxy. We look at the nuclear stellar disk population and we work out the oldest star that is in the nuclear stellar disk. The Milky Way is like no different to any of these other barred spiral galaxies that I showed. It does seem to have a nuclear structure, a nuclear stellar disk. These are star counts in the near infrared, like D-red in the star counts. And here we've zoomed out right down into the center of the galaxy. So we're only looking at like a few degrees across here. This is like a few hundred parsecs across. Yeah, it's a small structure, but it contains an awful lot of mass. There's like 1 billion solar masses just squeezed into this very small region. And okay, so the way I'm proposing that we understand when the bar formed is by then looking at the stellar ages of stars in this region. Yeah, because we're looking right through the midplane, right of the galaxy towards this structure. There's loads of dust in the way, and it becomes very hard to do any of the first two methods for stellar age determination that I showed. But the thing we can do is find Myra variables in this region. So this is where this method kind of shines. And Myra variables are great as age indicators, and they also follow period luminosity relations. So in theory, we could work out exactly whether they are within the nuclear stellar disk region. But this is complicated because of the reddening, again, because of the extreme extinction. So one thing instead I've done is look at the membership of the nuclear stellar disk by looking at the proper motions. So I don't know, maybe I'll just go back and think about this plot a bit more. So because the nuclear stellar disk is so vertically flattened, right? This is the view through the galaxy. So it's not got a very great extent at all in the vertical direction. That means kinematically in this direction is going to be a lot colder than the more extended bar that it sits within. So this panel here is like plus minus 20. So the bar that you can see here sticking out of the midplane is very much more vertically extended. And that means it's got much, much hotter kinematics. So instead of doing a sort of distance or 3D location separation, we can instead do a kinematic decomposition. And we can ask in each period bin, which remember here is age for the Mira variables, in each period, then how much of the bar do we have versus how much of the nuclear stellar disk. So as we move in period, we go from low period, which corresponds to old ages, these are lower mass stars, across to higher periods. We can see a clear transition that goes from bar dominance up to nuclear stellar disk dominance. And the transition point appears to coincide, to occur around 8 billion years. Here's an attempt to basically take the weights in the proper motion distributions and then work out the star formation history of both components. We can see at very, very old ages in this region, the majority of the stars are associated with a bar bulge component. But then as we go through this 8 billion year sort of transition point, we go towards a nuclear stellar disk dominance in this region. So the signal is somewhat subtle maybe, but this seems to indicate that the nuclear stellar disk began forming a significant number of stars about 8 billion years ago. And so that's why you know, I'm suggesting that that's the point at which the Milky Way's bar formed. The 8 billion years, you know, given the uncertainties, systematic uncertainties, and 10 billion years, they're not too far apart from each other. So we might sort of speculate, well, is there an association between bar formation in the Milky Way and the merger event, the GSE merger event? And this is what Alex Merrow did using, again, the Auriga zoom-in suite. So Auriga 18 has a very nice GSE-like merger that occurred at 9 billion years ago. So that's what's shown in this panel here. And then not long after that, a bar formed in this simulated galaxy. But it's not super clear then, was a bar always going to form? You know, is there a kind of causal relation in the simulation between these two events? So what the paper did is remove the GSE merger and then rerun the simulation. And if you take out the merger at 9 billion years and just continue to run the clock forward, a bar does eventually form, but it forms much, much later. So this galaxy is kind of predisposed to forming a bar. The sort of kinematic conditions are right for bar formation, but the merger event kind of encouraged it sort of on its way. So this is, you know, kind of interesting and suggestive that maybe in the Milky Way, we have a bar that's been merger induced. And yeah, further work on exactly pinning down these timings will perhaps shed a bit more light on that. Okay, when bars form, they typically slow down, and this is through drag on the dark matter from the dark matter halo. Here's just a very, very simple simulation that exhibits that. You can see on the right-hand side, this is the pattern speed, the rotation rate of the bar as a function of time. And you can see how that's declining over time. And in this simulation, which is just pure M-body, it's due to the fact that the bar is interacting with the dark matter halo, and you get this angular momentum transfer between them. Potentially gas complicates this picture, and you can even think about ways that maybe the bar could spin back up. But on the whole, bars in simulated bars seem to slow down over time. And this is important for understanding the structure of the galaxy as a whole, because there are certain orbits in and around the bar that have these special resonant properties of the bar. So they're the rotation rate, the orbital frequency, the rate at which the star is going around the galaxy, nicely coincides with the rotation rate of the bar. And when we're in this regime, the star will keep feeling the same forcing from the bar. So we're in this resonant location. So much like resonances you get in planetary systems. But if the bar slows, then the resonant orbits will move outwards as the bar slows. Okay, and this is interesting because the resonances can capture stars, and then as the bar slows, the captured stars can be moved outwards, and then the bar can sort of continue capturing stars as it goes, and these resonances can get significantly populated. So now we can go back and think about these chevrons that I mentioned in the very first, in the first part of the talk. So remember, these were these kind of striations. I showed this plot, these striations in the radial velocity versus radial distance plot. And here's a simulation from Adam Dillamore's work, where he seeds a stellar halo with stars and then just puts a slowing bar inside it. And as the bar slows, you get this kind of sweeping effect, the resonant capture, and then the resonant orbits move outwards, and you very clearly get these striations, these chevrons that appear. But you can see pretty nicely that you don't get these symmetric. The chevrons shouldn't be symmetric in this model, and that's exactly what we see in the data. So this is somewhat surprising, right? That the stars in the kind of in the halo of the galaxy that are on very radial orbits, very kind of like hot orbits, they care about the structure of the bar. But I mean, that does seem to be the case, and just showing like the resonance here is due to this kind of orbit that circulates around the end of the bar, and then the resonance here is due to this slightly more complicated. It's an outer Lindblad resonance where you get this sort of resonance condition between both the rotational frequency and the kind of the sort of radial frequency. And yeah, so potentially these things that were interpreted as being due to apocenter pileup from the accretion event, and the thing that I sort of maybe said that it gives some evidence that maybe the GSE merger didn't occur 10 billion years ago. Potentially, yeah, these are just resonant orbits in the bar. But the bar can also, as well as producing structure, the bar also seems to destroy structure. And remember the diagrams I was showing of the globular cluster associations with the GSE. So where in energy angular momentum space, we were associating different clumps with different merger events, because we were saying, well, the energy and angular momentum of the orbit stays approximately fixed. So those clusters that are near each other are on similar orbits and were accreted together. And that works nicely when you don't have a bar. But as soon as you introduce a bar, energy and angular momentum are no longer conserved quantities. So you get stretching along. This is the Jacobi energy direction in a fixed bar. And as soon as you make the bar slow, the Jacobi energy is no longer even an integral of the motion. And you still get these kind of striations, but the striations are kind of bend and sort of shear out further. And this is a much bigger effect when you're right down at low energies in the center of the kind of potential well. And energy is much more happily conserved when you're much further out in the galaxy, where you care much less about the bar. But these kind of calculations demonstrate that maybe we can't be as confident associating different groupings of globular clusters with certain merger events, particularly if they did occur a very long time ago. Okay, and now just the final few minutes, I'm going to talk about this third episode. So I've talked about the merger event, the bar formation, and now I'm going to talk about disk growth and radial migration. I think it's long been thought that the Milky Way has had quite a quiet merger history, and that's because the kinematics and dynamics of stars at kind of young to intermediate age, they're not sort of super featureful. There's relatively there are relatively smooth trends across populations, and so we very definitely seem to be in this period where over the last, here I've sort of said 0 to 8 billion years, where the disk is just kind of slowly sort of doing its thing, forming stars, kind of reshuffling sort of weakly through various scattering processes. So I'm going to try and flesh those ideas out a little bit now. So if we look at the ages of giant stars using this second method, the carbon-nitrogen method, we can see that the stars that are very young, these at 0 age here, are on have a much larger scale length than those that are here 6 billion years. So this is clear evidence of inside-out growth of the Milky Way disk, that the older populations formed more centrally, and then the later populations kind of formed sort of outside those. If you focus now on just the solid green line, you can see at the present day you have this very, very clear gradient in the half mass radius. And an extension of that work from Nej Frankel from 2019, Natsuki Funakoshi, who's a PhD student at MSSL, part of UCL, extended this timeline back beyond this, so beyond the 6 billion years we showed previously, and went sort of all the way back further. You can see here sort of beyond the age of the universe because of errors in the stellar ages, but yeah, let's kind of gloss over that. And you can see again, the plot here is flipped, but you can see this inside-out growth. The younger populations are on much more extended, have much more extended scale lengths than the older populations. One interesting feature that Natsuki pointed out was that you get this kind of dip where for very old populations, you have a sort of constant scale length. For the younger populations, this what we typically call the thin disk, you have this inside-out growth. And between them, there seems to be this dip. And again, you can look at the Auriga simulations, and we see something very, very similar in Auriga. This is, again, it's a different Auriga galaxy, Auriga 23, but at young ages, we get this inside-out growth. At old ages, you can see, it's not sort of perfectly constant like in the measurement of the Milky Way, but it does sort of flatten out somewhat in this region. But in between, there's this kind of dip. And if you look at the gas, I think these are young stars. I'm not actually totally sure. yeah, these are the young stars, I think, at each of these snapshots. And you can see how during this transitionary period, the gas disk is very truncated. And potentially that's what's happened in the Milky Way, that there's this period where the gas disk has truncated before then forming inside out. Now, again, this sort of happens around this kind of special 10 billion year point where maybe we could ask or think like, well, is this the GSE merger that's caused this contraction to happen? Has it kind of reduced the gas reservoir in the galaxy at this time? And that's why the disk is kind of contracted. Another hypothesis is maybe here we're going from a transition from cold to hot mode accretion during this period. But yeah, I think the kind of jury is still somewhat out on exactly how we interpret this. I suppose maybe some of you also, think, well, this is quite a weak signal to overinterpret. It seems to definitely be there, but it's interesting to think about, well, why is it weak? And one reason is when we look at things as a function of age, we're not necessarily just looking at how the galaxy was during the star formation, but we're looking at both the product of the star formation at that time ago, and then the subsequent processes that have reshaped the disk. And potentially that weakens the signal. And we can see the effect of these kind of restructuring processes in the Milky Way by if we just go back to this diagram that I showed very, very early on, the metallicity versus age. And you kind of just, these are stars in and around the solar neighborhood. And if we just cut through this distribution at a fixed age, fairly young age, you can see that there's a significant metallicity spread at fixed age. We might expect that stars that have formed around the solar neighborhood and have spent most of their life around the solar neighborhood would just then exhibit a fairly small spread at fixed age in this plane, because, yeah, they just would basically sample the star-forming gas at some fixed radius at which they were born. But that doesn't seem to be the case. We seem to have a significant metallicity spread. And this has been interpreted as the process of radial migration. Radial migration is a process where stars move from their birth location in the Milky Way to some other location, which we see them today. And it's usually attributed to, do I have to click it? Yeah, transient spirals. So here is a spiral potential perturbation being applied to the sort of orbit of a star in the galaxy. And on the right-hand side, it's in the co-rotating frame of that spiral pattern. And you can see in the co-rotating frame that the star moves from between two radii. So even though it starts on an initial circular orbit in the kind of unperturbed potential, when the spiral potential is added, it begins doing this looping around. These are sometimes called like horseshoe orbits. And now imagine that we just slowly switch off the spiral perturbation at some later time. Well, the star then would just be deposited at some sort of arbitrary point around this horseshoe orbit, and potentially it could then have moved a significant distance between, where it was before the spiral switched on to where it was after. And this is the process of radial migration. It's essentially a way to move stars through the disk, keeping them relatively cold, so on near circular orbits without significant heating. And in Nej's models, we added in some of these effects and demonstrated that this process of radial migration, where you move from circular orbit to circular orbit in the galaxy, is a significantly stronger effect than radial heating, which moves you from circular orbit to more eccentric orbits. This is just a cartoon. The orbits aren't really closed in the galaxy like this, but yeah. And this is important. So if we go back to this plot, the line we focused on previously was this present day half mass radius here in solid. And this is different from the birth half mass radius distribution. And by invoking the radial migration model, yeah, well, basically that difference is due to the measured radial migration that we put into the model. I think it's still very much an open question how, why radial migration, how radial migration operates in the Milky Way, and why it seems like that radial migration is very much stronger than the radial heating in the Milky Way. But and again, if we go back to this plot, like another thing we can observe here is, let's say we looked at the distribution of metallicities at this age, like whatever, 7 billion years or something. Well, we're not actually seeing a spread necessarily. We're almost seeing two sequences here. So before I was saying, well, we get a spread maybe from these radial migration processes. So the stars that higher metallicity move, like in the inner galaxy, move out to the solar neighborhood, and stars that are more metal poor in the outer galaxy move inwards. But maybe we're just seeing two sequences. So this was hypothesized by Hanyuan Zhang, PhD student in Cambridge, who suggested like maybe the reason that we're seeing this kind of behavior is because of the slowing bar in the Milky Way. So here on the right, these are the observations, the two sequences. This is just the Zhang and Rick's data I showed previously, but like sort of flipped and different color. The middle panel is if you have a simulation, yeah, with a constant pattern speed bar, and you get this metallicity versus age sequence in the solar neighborhood. And then when you add in a slowing bar, you begin producing in the simulations this upper sequence. So the upper sequence are things that have moved, been dragged out with the bar to the solar neighborhood. So they've got trapped in the co-rotation resonance with the bar and are transported outwards. So much in the same way as I showed the chevrons before. And the lower sequence then, orange, is basically the in situ material. So it's the stuff that stayed around its birth radius mostly over its whole lifetime. Okay, so yeah, that's essentially the talk. Just to summarize then, I hope what I've demonstrated is the kind of three parts of a whole. So it's sort of, yeah, three separate sets of results, but I've tried to really emphasize how like interconnected these different components are. So the GSE, for instance, produces these splashed up disk stars. But you know, in return, the disk is now shaping the distribution of the GSE material that we see today. The GSE and the dark matter, the GSE potentially produced the bar, and then has also maybe in its dark matter distribution acted to slow down the bar. And the bar in return is producing these kind of resonances that we see in the GSE material, and potentially destroying this idea of like identifying globular cluster clustering. And then finally, the disk material is feeding the nuclear stellar disk along the bar, and then the bar in return potentially is driving migration through the disk and explaining the distribution of the stars that we see in the solar neighborhood today. So yeah, that's my talk, the biased history of the galaxy. And you know, the general conclusion is really that Gaia and related photometric and spectroscopic surveys are really teaching us an awful lot and giving us a very rich picture about an individual galaxy, a galaxy that we can resolve in individual stars. And there's lots to look forward to in this area. particularly with the kind of next generation of large spectroscopic surveys. So SDSS-5, like Milky Way mapper, just recently had its first data release, and then we've got also Weave and Foremost coming online, providing a huge number of chemical abundances. And then we can also look forward to like detailed photometric surveys, Roman potentially providing much more detailed views of the inner galaxy, and Rubin potentially providing more detailed views of the outer galaxy. So yeah, thanks for your attention, everybody, and I'll take any questions. Sure, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Then we'll start. We'll wait for any junior hands for a second, and then we'll. Yes.
So sorry for this, but the chevrons you said were like asymmetric in the data.
Yeah.
Does this bar resonant picture help with that asymmetry?
Yeah. Oops. Completely. So the thing I showed, yeah, you can see. Can you see how they're asymmetric in the simulation? Yeah. Just because of the structure of the resonant orbits in the potential that if you sort of sample them at some solar neighborhood like location, then it gives rise to this asymmetry.
Because we're at an angle of the bar.
Yeah.
Oh, Tom, and then something.
On the bit where you were talking about the more tilted dark matter halo.
Yeah.
I'm maybe just a little bit confused, but why does that not then tilt everything instead of just tilting the GSE bit?
Why the disk doesn't then tilt as well? Yeah, that's a good question. I think potentially people have hypothesized that the tilted dark matter halo is producing the warp that we see in the disk. But the stellar halo, the difference I suppose between the disk and the stellar halo is the disk is much more like self-gravitating than the stellar halo. The stellar halo is much more like a tracer population. So the disk sort of can produce its own, is producing its own gravitational field in which it sort of is living. So that is the difference. But I think you're right probably to like question that, and now we're trying to look basically at whether this configuration, even in the dark matter, is stable. So essentially, we've just imposed these potentials and then asked, like what configuration of these fixed potentials is necessary to explain a long-lived stellar halo. And now it's a question of whether that whole configuration is itself stable. Yeah, that's a good point.
That was literally my question.
Oh, okay. We'll have it.
I wanted to ask about your picture of how you get a spread in metallicity.
Yeah.
If I understood you right, you were sort of arguing an observed spread in metallicity at fixed age needs to be explained because the stars that were forming at that time would intrinsically have had a small spread in metallicity. And then you tell us a nice story about migration. I believe you the migration story, so it's great. I love the dynamics. Do we actually know that at a given age, the metallicity of star-forming material is so narrow?
At a given age and location.
Yeah.
Yeah,
how
that's
much variability is there?
Yes.
Okay, fine. One given molecular cloud, fine, metals are well mixed. But are they well mixed, over a kiloparsec scale that you're talking about here?
I suppose the question is more whether like azimuthally, maybe in my picture, is there significant metallicity variation?
Yeah.
I think we can answer that question like today just by looking at the sort of star-forming regions and the metallicities that are associated with those. And it's significantly smaller than this spread. Okay. I don't know, like 0.0 a few, I think. Something like that. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's so I think it's a pretty reasonable assumption to say that given radius and time, the metallicity is somewhat constant. But yeah, in the more recent models, we add in this like intrinsic spread as well, based on these observations today. Then, of course, you could ask, like, well, what's the spread back in the past? And that's where it gets a bit more murky. But yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
I did.
Do we think that merger events like beyond GSC, like maybe Sagittarius, also have such a like complex interplay between like different structural components of the Milky Way?
Yeah, good question. I ended up originally I was going to talk a little bit about like the Milky Way today and the like LMC and stuff. So, but yes, certainly. I mean, some people have suggested that you can see star formation events in the outer disk and maybe heating events in the outer disk that you could attribute to passages of Sagittarius. So yes, I think is the answer. So it's a complicated picture. That's just another aspect. Yeah, I haven't touched it.
So back on this question of the dark matter halo being sort of off center or tilted or whatever, like, is that something you could look at like cosmological simulations and see if there are instances of something like this?
Yeah. So in Adam's paper, there's one TNG 50 galaxy that we show that exhibits the same kind of behavior, that you have this hierarchy of sort of the disk, the stellar halo, and then the dark matter halo in that kind of hierarchy. So the plot is like tilt as a function of distance. And we're now looking with a master student a larger sample to see to look at them. And yeah, but I think others have looked into this question, and that you do find these kind of systems, definitely. I think really now we're interested in how they relate to the merger events, and how like long-lived they are, whether they're evolving as well.
And back there.
To come back to the metallicity spread.
Okay.
Sorry. So the very old stars on the right?
Yeah.
So why can't we just say that we have like a lot of mergers with a very wide range of satellite masses, stellar masses, and then you get the spread at that time coming just for the fact that you're merging galaxies with very different metallicities. They all have their own, metallicity stellar mass relation, and you have a lot of mergers at that time, early time.
Yep.
And then at later time, you have much less mergers and much more like.
To explain this population here.
The larger spread.
Like here, you saw. Yeah. I suppose because the metallicity is actually quite high at this point, so it's pretty difficult to explain that solely from just a bunch of mergers, because I mean the masses of those mergers would have to be basically equivalent to the mass of the Milky Way. But that it's much more likely that this is, to get to these kind of metallicities, you have just sort of more in situ star formation re-enrichment, that's happening within the galaxy itself. Does that answer the question?
Kind
of. Okay.
Last question. Was there another hand?
I thought I saw another. Anyways, I'll take it. So staring at the Fangs galaxies, we've been sort of emerging to a picture where the dominant factor associated with bar formation is just big galaxy, like stellar mass, and sort of crossing this 10 to the 10 threshold.
Yeah.
And you laid out a case that, in the cosmological simulations, you had a bar that formed substantially later. And so I was just wondering if you could comment on whether, is that clearly the GSC merger will increase the mass. When you're comparing that to the sort of null case there, are those at comparable masses, at comparable ages, bar and no bar, or does it actually reach, is the system without a bar lower mass until later?
you're asking specifically about this example?
Yeah, or can you comment more generally on does it require one of these merger events, or is it just the growth of the stellar system to a certain mass?
Yeah, so with this particular example, these two rows are the same galaxy. The bottom one is resimulated without the merger event, right? So they're exactly comparable to each other in terms of the mass, etc. Because well, modulo the material that's coming in,
I guess,
of course. But I'm not sure. Yeah. So,
the sidebar is just how major of a merger was the GSE? Was it like 10-to-1, 3-to-1? Yeah.
No, nowhere near that. I think initially people thought maybe 10-to-1 or more massive, but I think now the estimates are really coming down and it's actually much lower than that. I don't know. It's probably more like 5 times 10 to the 8 in stars. But exactly how massive the Milky Way was at that point is more of an open question. But yeah, I mean, in the Auriga set, I think there are things that form bars just in like isolation, just through like normal instabilities. So you don't necessarily have to have mergers that induce the bars. Yeah.